Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kaveh Taghwaei. We're going to talk about the war in Libya in terms of what transitions are going to take place. Now, some of the questions that arise from that are many. Now, at this point, revolutionaries have not won the war yet. Western countries are already talking about the post-Gaddafi period, such as how Libya needs to honor its oil contracts. But is the transition going to be a smooth one? Will the revolutionaries and the NTC stay loyal to their Western allies, or is there a danger that there will be a power struggle amongst themselves? In the case of internal fighting, will the U.S. and its coalition, NATO, send boots on the ground? Just some of the questions to be discussed in this edition of Press TV News Analysis.
A military spokesman of anti-Gaddafi forces in Libya says the regime has come to an end as his troops have lost control of 95% of the country. This just shortly after the opposition forces took over Gaddafi's last stronghold in Tripoli, the heavily fortified compound of Bab al-Aziziyah. The storming of Bab al-Aziziyah appeared to herald the de facto end of Gaddafi's 42-year rule, but inside the compound there was no trace of those the fighters were looking for, Gaddafi and his sons. Early on Wednesday, in a new audio message, the fugitive leader promised to fight to death, despite the seizure of his headquarters. With Gaddafi's whereabouts still unknown and his sons unaccounted for, the revolutionaries cannot declare victory at this time yet. But they have announced a series of reforms. The head of Libya's National Transitional Council says Libyans will go to the polls in presidential and parliamentary elections within 8 months. Mustafa Abdel Jalil promised that Gaddafi will be tried in a fair court in Libya. Meanwhile, NATO has said it will continue its bombing campaign in Libya during what it calls the final chapter of Gaddafi's regime. NATO unleashed an offensive on Libya under a UN mandate. China, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, abstained from voting on the resolution. Beijing is now calling on the United Nations to play a leading role in post-war efforts in Libya. The war was initially announced to be aimed at protecting civilians from the Gaddafi forces. However, scores of civilians have lost their lives in NATO airstrikes. There are also speculations that the real objective of the offensive has been the occupation of the North African state, which possesses huge oil reserves.
President Barack Obama may need to reconsider his assertion that there would not be any American boots on the ground. Leadership is hard to assert without a presence.
People are going to be fighting first and foremost about the best oil in the world, which is found in Libya, and about the purest water that it's found in the desert. So it's going to be a heck of a fight.
Well, those are going to be some of the questions that we're going to ask our guests. Let me introduce them. We have a human rights activist by the name of Maher Saloom. He joins us from Beirut. We have the director of the Center for Research on Globalization, Michelle Chossudovsky, who joins us from Montreal. Gentlemen, thank you both. Let me first go to you, Maher Saloom. The conclusion right now is that once Gaddafi falls, and many are saying that's imminent, there'll be a smooth transition with elections, as the NTC head has said, within 8 months. Kind of a rosy picture, don't you think? But more importantly, will the transition be that smooth? How do you see the future of the new Libya, Maher Saloom, in the absence of Muammar Gaddafi?
Well, in case the pro-Gaddafi forces until now in Libya, they have not shown fullest support towards the new republic, let's say, of Libya under the control of the NTC, Mahmoud Jibril and Mustafa Abdel Jalil as leaders. Please do not forget today the very important meeting that was held by Sarkozy in his own palace in Paris, welcoming Mahmoud Jibril as the executive director for the National and Transitional Council of the new Republic of Libya. Now, if we look at it like from an angle that shows enough support actually to the NTC today by the West for sure, and the co-relationship and the aftermath of the military action that was perpetrated, and assistance, I mean the personal assistance and the huge assistance actually by the West and the NATO in helping those rebels to overcome their weakness and pressure a natural success over the Gaddafi himself, the colonel, his sons, and his followers and the mercenaries for sure, that they were backing him up. as of Libya and other neighboring countries. I mean, after bribing them and after corrupting the whole issue inside Libya. I mean, Gaddafi speaking. Now, the whole outcome is a natural outcome. We have a democratic state, hopefully, by the West that has been seen so far inside Libya. They need a temporary government to be headed and formed by this NTC, actually, and a new presidential for sure, but before that, hopefully, a new parliamentary election, a new parliament, and then, hence, for sure, should be elected a new president for this new republic that has been instrumented, analyzed, and planned well for by the West, and specifically by the United States and France and other important nations in the Western Hemisphere.
And continuing along with that line of thought in terms of the planning that has taken place, Professor, Western powers have said the international community will support the political transition to a free and democratic Libya. But in what form will this support come? A Western democracy imposed on Libyans? I mean, what's that going to mean for the Libyans? They used the same language when they attacked Afghanistan 10 years ago, and of course we have Iraq where they attacked 8 years ago. The U.S. still insists that soldiers should have immunity in these countries. How will it be in Libya?
Well, I think we have to understand both the nature of this military operation, the covert intelligence behind the rebels, as well as the extensive bombing of civilian infrastructures, residential areas, universities and hospitals, which has taken place in the course of the last few months, and particularly the virtually the continuous bombing at night of Tripoli in the course of the last few days. We're talking about 20,000 sorties, 8,000 strike sorties. In other words, what has happened in the course of these last few months, and particularly in the last few weeks, is the destruction of an entire country, of its infrastructure, its institutions, very targeted, lots of civilian casualties. In other words, the Western pro-democracy, NATO-supported rebels, as well as NATO's heads of state and heads of government, they have blood on their hands. They have a lot of blood on their hands because they've killed a lot of men, women, and children. Our correspondent, Mahdi Nazem Roya, has been reporting from the Rixos Hotel. Just a few hours ago, he and several other journalists joined in other words, the extraction project. They were liberated from the hotel where they had been for several days, and they are safe now. But I can tell you, my understanding, first of all, is that this is not a revolution. These are NATO-trained gunmen. They are Al-Qaeda-related paramilitary mercenaries. They have very little support within civil society in Libya. They have whether we like the Gaddafi regime or not, I don't think that's the issue. But in fact, the large majority of the population are against the rebellion, and the only thing that sustained the rebellion were the NATO bombings. And these are criminal bombings. Let's state things as they are. Violation of international law, actions which are criminal in terms of their consequences, killing children, killing houses of people. And this has been so documented. And what is more, I think what is even more criminal in this process is the fact that this is presented to the media as a humanitarian operation. Realities are turned upside down, and we are told that war is peace, and the lie becomes the truth. Essentially, that's what happened.
Okay,
Because
we're going to get to that point a little bit more with you, Professor.
Read the media this morning in Montreal,
let me just bring in Maher Saloom back. I apologize. Let me bring in Maher Saloom back. We're going to get to that point and a more expanded version of a question I'm going to ask you about that. Maher Saloom, I noticed you said a lot of hopefullys when I asked about this smooth transition, something which Western powers, a swift return to order is high on their list. They have fears, though, just like the professor said about some of the divisions. Let's talk about ethnic and tribal divisions that may rise, even maybe among the revolutionaries. I mean, isn't there such a threat possible? And more importantly, why should Western powers be worried if they've recognized the NTC and believe the revolutionaries represent the Libyans, yet they're afraid of some of these ethnic tensions that may arise?
Well, if you would ask my own opinion about this, I would share the same point that President Medvedev of Russia today, that he admitted actually, or he was convinced to say it, that there should be compromise and there should be dialogue between the two factions long time ago, not now actually, and this is not the right timing, between the Gaddafi forces and the rebels. I mean, headed by Saif al-Islam maybe back then, and now today the Mustafa Abdul Jalil or Mahmoud Jibril. Now, if you look upon the military action, I would advise the West, and specifically the United States and the NATO alliance, not to intervene military, for sure not. This is a very highly sensitive position right now for the NATO and the West inside Libya and the Arab world today. I mean, this is not only Libya, because everything we are monitoring or we are seeing right now through the satellite TV stations, all the Arab world is watching this continuously and day by day and hour by hour, specifically in the days of Ramadan today. So what we are, seeing today is a smooth transition. It could be, but in case the NTC itself, the National Council, headed by Mustafa Abdul Jalil, shows strength and unity and solidarity within itself, not to show any division, that hence will benefit the Gaddafi forces inside Libya or any Islamic, let's say, coalition groups, as my colleague mentioned in Montreal, that it could be Al-Qaeda and so forth, so many Islamic forces that were created actually by the West themselves back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, when the Soviet Union was still underground on Afghanistan grounds actually. Now, when we say that the people of Libya are not showing support towards the rebels, I don't think so. I do not agree with my friend in Montreal, and yesterday there was a guy also from overseas. I believe this is not the real support that the people are showing today for the rebels themselves. So there is a popularity behind those people. It could be some mercenaries helping Gaddafi and not those people, actually the rebels, but there is strength and strong support, by the West itself and the NATO alliance, whether not military, it should be civically and civilly very soon, in order to have a smooth transition for the Republic of the new Libya.
But the way that this was gone about from the West through this NATO operation, Professor, many Western countries, including France, they've talked about the success of this operation, and then were it to succeed, and its knockoff effect in the region. I mean, doesn't that pose a threat of abuse of what is called the R2P, the right to protect, under humanitarian motives for their own gains? And then in turn, what about the R2P for countries such as Yemen, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia? If that is the way that they think they have to go about it, why don't they mention those countries? Why mention only Syria, as the French President Sarkozy said in his meeting with the NTC?
Well, I've been studying dictatorships for more than 30 years, and I've lived in Latin America. The United States has never been concerned with dictators. In fact, they install the dictators as long as those dictators follow their orders and establish a proxy state and serve U.S. interests. And that was the case in Chile under the Pinochet regime. And that was the case in Argentina, in Brazil, and in Central America. Now, we must understand the nature of this military operation. The rebellion does not exist without NATO. Militarily and politically, it does not exist without NATO, and we must understand that NATO special forces are already operating within the rebellion, of course, covertly, on the ground, They are experienced armed forces. They are mercenaries, they're paramilitary, and then they're gunmen. But the moment NATO withdraws, the rebellion would not last very long. I think any military analyst would confirm that. But now the question that the more fundamental question which is being raised, and it's being raised in the United States, and it's already on the drawing board of the Pentagon and NATO, is are there going to be boots on the ground? Well, the boots on the ground are already there. The question is whether it's going to be made official. The Apache helicopters are there, the special forces are there, but we have a massive deployment of naval power in the Mediterranean with thousands of Marines and soldiers, particularly the George Bush Senior, the USS George Bush Senior. It's the latest aircraft carrier, which is a sort of high tech. It's just been released, and it has positioned itself in the Mediterranean, and it is there in the case there's a ground war. Well, then we would see Allied forces landing on the beaches in Libya. Now, if you look at the scenarios, I don't think that the rebellion on its own would last very long. It doesn't have the military capabilities. It doesn't even have the institutional capabilities to create a real government. So what's going to happen is the NATO special forces are going to remain. Others are going to come in, perhaps not officially boots on the ground, and eventually they're going to establish, as they did in Iraq in 2003, they're going to establish some kind of proxy Libyan government with the people whom they can trust, who are their lackeys. They might contemplate modeling Libya as a sheikhdom with more of a
right.
On the model of Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states. In any event, what is happening there is a neo-colonial reconquest of not only of Libya, but of the whole African continent, the militarization of the African continent with AFRICOM, of course. But we must
let me get a reaction from Maher Saloom to your statements there, because it needs to be noted there. Let me bring in Maher Saloom. Maher Saloom, if you can, please give a reaction there to the professor. I mean, what he said in essence is what transpired in Iraq and eventually in Afghanistan. Iraq, the U.S. is still insisting to stay beyond their 2011 mandate. Do some of those scenarios, which are realities on the ground, strike a bell there?
Okay.
Maybe that's what the Western powers underlying everything that they have claimed under this R2P, UN Resolution 1973, is what's turning out to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me share my colleague in Montreal. I mean, in case this scenario happens, that the more bloodshed will be occurring on the soil of Libya today, in case those rebels do not show, any strength or support by the people, let's say, and division will come up, hopefully, as planned by the West, I believe, because they want a certain division, I believe, inside Libya, where more bloodshed will occur on the soils of Libya today. In case this happens, then we are looking ahead maybe to divide two states in one state inside Libya, and hence we have a southern part that could be infiltrated or located for the Al-Qaeda or the Islamists inside Libya and the surrounding Arab nations. But let me go back to his statements as when the CIA or the Americans were plotting any coup d'etat inside Central America or Southern America. Let us not forget Hosni Mubarak. How did he come inside Egypt as the leading president after the assassination of Anwar Sadat? Because this was a good plot, I believe. Even Gaddafi himself, in 1968, when he became into power, he was only 26 years old as a first lieutenant. He was inspired for sure, and even maybe deployed or developed by the Central Intelligence agents back then. So now is the time for him to leave in a new scenario and a new plot for the Libyans, actually, in order for the West and the Europeans to take their hands and put it over the oil reserves and the gas plants actually inside Libya, because they need it utmostly and really strategically today because of the economic recessions that are happening actually in the Western European nations such as Germany, Spain, Portugal, and even France. And even today, do not forget the economic, not only recession, I believe, is going to a depression in case Obama did not resolve the whole situation with the Republican Party, even though in the Congress of the United States. So we are looking ahead for a whole new agenda or a whole new scenario.
Mar Saloum, go ahead, Professor. Go ahead.
Yes. I was asked that question. They said, this was with regard to Iraq. They said, Professor, I was in a public lecture, said, Professor, we need that oil. Okay, that is the Western position. We need that oil. My answer to them is trade. Don't steal it. That is what the Western oil companies are there. They've already positioned themselves. The Libya Oil Company, which was a very important state entity, which was there to serve the Libyan people, finance development, that is going to be taken over, privatized, and handed over to Total, which is the French oil company, to Eni.
Yes.
And that is what I say. If you need the oil, well, you buy it on the market, and accept the fact that a large share of oil resources lie in Muslim lands. It's more than 60%. But that belongs to people in Muslim countries, and then the West can buy it from them. They don't need to come in and invade countries and steal the oil. And that is happening. It happened in Iraq, and now it's happening in Libya.
Maher Saloum, isn't that a point too? Maher Saloum, before you answer that, tell us, is that a challenge for the NTC? Isn't it to redistribute Libya's oil revenues to reach the Libyans? But what about when they came out before and made deals with countries that help with the war? They made deals.
I believe
with these countries. So what does that show?
Under the table. Yes, I believe maybe deals economically under the table actually by the NTC and the West so far, in case this rebellion succeeds in capturing the major cities actually that Gaddafi forces were deployed. Do not forget that still Gaddafi is not out of Sirte, his hometown, not only in Bab al-Aziziyah and even in Sabha in Libya. Do not forget those three pivotal cities. Until now, Gaddafi is not out of them completely. So what we need to study upon is to correlate the economic and international scenes actually. Do not forget also the Chinese role in investing in Libya so far, $19 billion in oil investments actually with Libyan ex-regime, let's say Gaddafi so far, but it's not over until the fat lady sings, as the Americans usually say. And we need to look upon the economic standing point of the Russians today, Medvedev and Putin, what they need to say, because the West so far needs to compete with the Russians and the Chinese, even inside the Arab nations such as Libya. Libya is part of the top 5 countries exporting oil and gas overseas. Do not forget, this is a very important point. We need to look inside it economically and think strategically for the whole Arab world, and not to the case of the nationality or the nationalism of the Libyan powers so far under the Libyan new republic today.
Not to mention the vast amount of oil reserves that they have, and of course water, another big resource. But we have to end it there. Thank you so much. Statements there from human rights activist Maher Saloum from Beirut, and from the director from the Center for Research on Globalization, we heard from Michel Chossudovsky from Montreal. Thank you for your statements. And of course, thank you, the viewer, for watching. Do send us your questions to newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, Kabatakwe, and the entire team, it's goodbye.